Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. Every list of potential Republican presidential candidates includes Rudy Giuliani near the top. Rob Polner, who reported on politics and government from City Hall for Newsday during much of the Giuliani administration, thinks people should know more about those times. So he organized and edited a collection of articles and essays into a book called America's Mayor, The Hidden History of Rudy Giuliani's New York. You say in the book that you observed Giuliani's rise and fall and then rise again in political circles.
Right.
So let's talk about it.
Well, think back on it. He was barely elected by a very narrow, I think, fewer than 50,000 votes.
When he ran against David Dinkins
in '93. The secession vote, Staten Island, brought out Republicans to the polls. Probably can thank Sheldon Silver for that.
Yeah.
Putting that on the ballot, a Democrat, and others, and and he became a very, very popular mayor with many segments of the city. He
never acknowledged that he just squeaked into the office, right?
No,
he strode into City
It was
Hall.
as if he had a mandate from the voters.
And how?
And that's the way he carried himself. And you know, it's funny, when you think about his rise, someone was reminding me, right around the time he was elected, there were this issue of whirlpooling. Do you remember that headline in the New York Post where 13-year-old, 14-year-old girls were in their swimsuit were getting molested in city pools.
Right.
When a group of kids, usually boys, would circle them and create a whirlpool effect, and before they knew it, you know, maybe their top was off, something like that. And the Dinkins administration, I guess, threw up their hands and said, we got to live through these headlines. There's not a heck of a lot anybody can do about this. These are kids, and well, there was a sense of we can't do anything. Well, Giuliani said, how many pools are there? Okay, a cop at every pool. Whirlpooling ended, the headlines ended, and he went on to the next issue. And that anecdote, I think, crystallizes his appeal. And how he then went on to demand credit for and get credit for a kind of the changes that the city were already afoot. The drop in crime was well underway, and other sort of calming down of the city. So that was his rise, right?
He had the advantage, I think, of following a David Dinkins, who always presented you with alternatives. Dinkins never came out with a simple declarative sentence, right? And Giuliani had no problem doing that,
not a lot
whether
of
he was right or wrong.
Right, not a lot, exactly. Not a lot of patience for ambiguities or never wanted to be perceived as being indecisive. And as you know, this city government became very hyper-centralized. Everything had to come through the mayor's office. Except when it was bad news, then I guess the commissioner had to deal with it.
So that was the rise.
That was the rise, and of course he was overwhelmingly reelected. By the end of his term, a lot of the traits that were characterized as strengths began to be perceived, I think correctly, as overreaching, insensitive, words like that. And he was finished as a politician. I mean, people forget. There's no way he would have won another term. He tried to extend his term via the state legislature by 3 months. He was convinced that the city couldn't carry on without him. I think we've seen that we could.
This was at 9/11.
After 9/11.
Which happened on primary day.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he threw a wrench into the primary. But he was more or less destined to be remembered for what he had already accomplished. He was spent force. He'd been through his divorce, which was very bitter. Public. You know, he alienated, you know, even many of his supporters with his behavior, his antics. He seemed erratic.
Yeah.
The administration was adrift. Remember, he'd run or entertained the run for U.S. Senate, and he seemed to put the whole mayoralty to the side, which you can do in other states, but not necessarily New York City. And I think
people were really tired of him.
A friend of mine says he would have been in an American Express commercial. Do you know me? I carried the American Express a few years down.
That was
political irrelevancy.
Lieutenant Governor or somebody who was that. Anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And but 9/11 re-scrambled everything, and he handled himself with kind of, aplomb, and he did beautifully in those days. A lot of questions have surfaced since about just
what he really did,
what really happened, but he hit the right notes, the right grace notes.
He was a character. I mean, he just continued in character. He was on the camera all the time, right?
And he was uncomfortable without a crisis, real or conjured up by him.
Yeah.
That's the kind of character he was. When it was quiet, you could see him almost twitching and uncomfortable and looking around the room for enemies. I always perceived it that way. And he just did not function well in peacetime. I mean, even after crime had fallen beyond anything he could have dreamed of or imagined, partly due to his tactics, partly due to factors that were happening all over the country, he
grabbed it.
He continued, what I'm saying is he continued with the same hard line, or sought to continue with the same hard line. The street crimes unit, didn't need to disband it. If we disband it, crime will go up, he made the claim, right? So he continued, never admitting a mistake, continued always in the direction he'd begun with, even when the external conditions changed. I think he has that in common with Bush.
Yeah.
But we're changing the course now. There's an inflexible, there's a rigidity there, and there's a need to overreach and to always be at the center stage. That we don't have that kind of mayor now, right. And it's interesting. But the city seems to still function.
When I read the book, it brought back all the memories because I spent those 8 years in the city council.
Right.
And there was a vindictiveness, a real nastiness. I mean, it was such a divisive time because he was always pitting someone against somebody else.
Yeah,
right.
That was his style. Doesn't mean he couldn't be a great mayor. LaGuardia was said to be have some of those kind of qualities, but he
had no vision either, really.
Giuliani?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I don't think he had a vision for a transcendent kind of vision with history in mind of where the city could go. He dealt with the cards as they were given to him. He was a prosecutor,
a vindictive prosecutor, basically, or an aggressive vindictive prosecutor.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the warning. Vindictive. We knew what he did before as the U.S. attorney.
Right. And those kind of petty fights, I think they were entertaining for a while. I think they helped people engage with him and see that he was a tough fighter. But again, by the second term, by 9/11, he was
worn out.
Pretty much worn out with him, and we need to move on as a city.
Do you think the personal business was the final touch? I mean, then he was marching a parade with his girlfriend while he's still married, and he sort of announced he was getting divorced on.
Yeah, I think he was.
Television.
I think he was.
That was the final.
Yeah, and then there was a sense that his policies, if they had a place in first term, they were no longer that relevant. And the personal sort of implosion of his family life played out on the public stage. It certainly didn't help him.
So now we have this.
Get ugly.
But he left then, with the having risen again, and he's called America's mayor. Mm-hmm. He's adored all over. Mm-hmm. He's getting credit for having been a wonderful mayor, and he's thinking of running for president. I mean, it's an incredible phenomena when you think about it.
Yeah, there's a disconnect.
Because aside from his own personal traits, his policies left much to be desired, didn't they? I thought they did.
Well, I don't think his policies. I think his policies were like a blunt, club across the head, and they were not. They were never that well fine-tuned, or, they didn't deal with the gray areas. And so much, from being in the city council is really about the gray areas and how the city's really spending its money. you know, one of the things, I mean, one of the things about him too, as he considers presidential race, is a question is how, you know, for someone who's conservative, once they get to know his record, is he a reliable vehicle for carrying out conservative agenda? And I was just thinking back on how he decided after he became ill with prostate cancer that he was going to sign up, he announced very abruptly, he was going to sign up every single city agency to the task of getting people, families on Medicaid. And yeah, and hitching onto a state federally funded program. So, but this was after years of more or less fighting it, saying we don't need the money, saying the city would misuse it, and in a way equating it, I always thought, with his disdain for all kinds of welfare, food stamps, you know, people who use it.
We had to fight. I mean, when he started with a welfare program, it was the federal program, but he went straight for the heart of it. I mean, he had the work employment program where everybody was working, right? Not enough daycare for women who were put to work.
No.
Nothing like for jobs.
Nothing like what they did in Wisconsin, where they really tried to match services to that were going to be needed when people no longer had welfare, transportation, daycare, so forth, training. He just threw people off welfare and said, work ethic, work ethic. And it sounds great, you know, it's great headlines. And, you know, when do newspapers nowadays even bother to write about the welfare system? They don't, because no one's taking an axe to it. And when you take an axe to it, it's a great story.
And he appointed a terrible person as the chair, Jason Turner, who could not have been more out of place in New York.
He seemed very out of place.
I think one of the basic problems is he doesn't handle race very well, does he, Giuliani?
No, he's got a tin ear on it. He claimed to be kind of colorblind on all of his policies, but I mean, he couldn't have been too colorblind because he barely got over, you know, 15% are usually in the polls among African Americans.
He attacked affirmative action because it wasn't colorblind.
Right, and his cabinet was largely
essentially white.
He was given to statements that were, you know, borderline, you know, seemed racist.
Well, and that first, before he got elected, when he appeared at that rally of the police over the Civilian Review Board, that was really
right. And I mean, I think more than anything, more than all that sort of rhetorical stuff, he was when he had to cut the budget, he never touched the police department, the largest in the country. Okay. Okay, but what he always went after were the institutions that largely served minorities in this town, whether it's the city hospitals or the hospitals union.
It's terrible with the city hospitals.
Certainly the Board of Ed.
Legal aid.
Remember
the fight he had with legal aid.
Legal aid. I mean, usually the public institutions, which, you know, are part of the big bad liberal establishment, right? I'm putting that in quotes, but that's what that legacy is, what he went after, and who is that going to hit home with? But very often, you know, people who don't have money, and in New York, that happens to be often people of color. So that there's no surprise they didn't feel he was really on their side, even though many communities that are largely minority did benefit from the drop in crime.
It was interesting, and he made a point of that.
He made a point of saying that, yeah.
Right,
and
that was his touch, right?
Well, he told the Washington Post during his re-election campaign, they should be happy that they're alive, or some words like that. I mean, that's what I mean. I mean, something.
So sensitivity.
So, you know, I think also while he was, well, I mean, we could go on about him, but.
Well, that's interesting, and I think that we need to, but I mean, reading it, I thought about the police, and that was his favorite place. And, but he also then had trouble with his police commissioners because he didn't want to share any of the glory, right? And he had to be the spokesperson, so it was his ego. But we haven't heard stories of people having their door banged down, right, with people coming in with warrants for their arrest.
Right.
And that used to be a very common occurrence.
Right. There was really the sense in this, and living in the city at the time, of that the police had carte blanche to throw people down, to arrest people on for nothing charges.
I remember I had a constituent who had a broken taillight, and she was a teacher, a college professor, I think, who taught in New Jersey. She was stopped on Riverside Drive. She landed up for 8 hours handcuffed to the gate in the jail. I mean, it was just...
These stories were legion.
Yeah,
and,
all over, always.
And
then, of course, we had the deaths. First we had Amadou Diallo, and then we had Dorisman, which was really...
Right, which really crystallized some of his worst tendencies to overreach, to have his commissioner wave around, sealed
and never to be able to say, I'm sorry, it was a mistake or something. That's right. Instead, what did he do? He came out...
He just went further and further to impugn the victim of a bungled, police buy and bust, or bust and buy, whatever you call it.
It's terrible.
And so that issue, I remember coming right at the height of all those problems we were talking about, crystallizing the affair, his health, and now Patrick Dorisman. Dorisman didn't have to become the issue it did, but it was the way, even though it probably deserved to, it was the way he handled it. And it was always about how Rudy handled it, because he controlled the storyline, he controlled the media. He was very deft at that. And the headlines, and he mishandled it, he bungled it, he overreached. That's Rudy Giuliani, which is, if you run for president, you wonder, would he, first of all, would he be successful in a Republican primary? That goes to the question of, this issue of Medicaid. He signs up everyone for Medicaid, and someone asks him, how did you come to this? And he said, I thought of it in the shower.
But you were also right about that that a lot of his positions, interestingly enough, on choice, on abortion,
right,
and on gay rights, he was pretty good. I remember he invited me for lunch while he was running the second time.
Right.
We had lunch in a hotel in a little private room, and he was trying to tell me how liberal he was, that he was a McGovern supporter when he was younger,
True.
And so some of that it's his quixotic kind of thing. You never know what he's going to do.
He didn't reach, he had his base, which was sort of the white ethnic neighborhoods of the city, but he didn't reach beyond it.
Yeah.
And a mayor with a real overarching vision for the city and where it's going, I think would have sought to reach beyond that base. He didn't. He didn't feel comfortable stepping outside the comfort zone. And he felt that was the way he was with his aides too. I think he had a very loyal, tight cadre. Now, if he's going to run for president, I've heard nothing that he's establishing an organization. I don't know if he's poll testing issues or focus groups. He's running a company. He's giving motivational speeches and all that, making a lot of money.
If he does run or becomes a candidate, are you going to reissue this book?
Yeah, we're going to put out a second issue and revive it and
Has anybody analyzed the success of his company? I know he's made a lot of money, but he was hired to go in and make Mexico City safer. Has he done that?
Well, I read in Wayne Barrett's new book on largely dealing with, and also Dan Collins co-wrote, dealing with his management, or they would say mismanagement, of essentially the emergency response to 9/11. They do touch on what his company's been up to. Very little's been written about it. That was the most extensive.
Because that would be an interesting story.
I
don't agree with you. I was one of the critics who never relented with 9/11. I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
First of all, what did they call the center, their command room? What was that called? The
command center?
Command center or something.
Yeah.
I remember when that came up for the council, because it was a lease.
Mm-hmm.
It was the most absurd thing I ever heard of. To take, what floor was it on? The 20th floor?
You mean the emergency command center?
Emergency command center.
On the 23rd floor
of a building at the World Trade Center site, which was known as being one of the major sites in New York for it had already had an attempt to destroy it, right? Then it's on the 23rd floor. It made no sense at all, and it cost a fortune to do it. So it wasn't even able to be used.
I just remember every time there was any forecast of snow, they would drag the City Hall reporters over there to have the press conference about how the city was girding for the battle against the big snowstorm. It was a backdrop.
Yeah.
And it was, to be fair, I don't remember at all hearing anyone saying, why are you building it at the site of...
We did say it in the council.
Was it so?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. A few of us.
I remember more
the
complaint that it's a sign of his siege mentality, or they call it the bunker.
Did you feel manipulated as a member of the press by that administration?
Well, you expect to be manipulated, but I felt like we were fed a lot of manure, and relentlessly. And so I also feel like there was no commitment, just the opposite, to any kind of dialogue. A lot of the stories I wrote and other political reporters wrote from City Hall probably would have been tempered. A lot of the critical stories would have been tempered if the administration would put someone on the phone to talk to us about why they were doing what they were doing. But there was a sense of you guys don't matter, and you get in the way anyway. You're an interest group. This is kind of an MO of a lot of politicians, certainly in Washington now. And I think about Giuliani is now. He's said virtually nothing since he left office on the issues of the day, except to very blatantly position himself as friend of Bush, at the convention here in New York, in his statements occasionally on Sunday morning news, but nothing. I mean,
and just his persona though sort of represents, I'm going to save us from terrorism attacks.
Right, he's got this persona, but
he
it's
didn't
just
save us.
It's just a persona, and now you have, I think, a really serious issue that would dog him if he did run, which is the health and welfare of the workers at Ground Zero.
Right, he has to be partly responsible for that, doesn't he?
Oh yeah, well, first of all, he's got one of the largest
I'm
environmental
so glad you brought that up,
protection.
because that's what I keep thinking as I read about it.
Yeah, there was no sense around after 9/11 that of safety.
And they weren't advocates for people here.
Yeah, I mean,
right? He wasn't an advocate.
No, they didn't have a sense of safety. Someone was reminding me about a couple of months. Cardinal Egan came to have a memorial event at Ground Zero, and it was still smoking. And the violinists on their own, who played the chamber music for this event, wore air masks. They weren't told they had to. They just wore. There was no sense of safety around this. There was, and that's, we knew at the time. I mean, the citizens knew at the time this air is not safe. You had
smelt, and it was terrible.
Computers evaporating into the air, creating toxins that were never thought of in a lab, and so it couldn't have been safe to work under. And the city has the third or fourth largest EPA probably in the land. Apart from the fact that the federal government was saying it's safe, I think that Giuliani bears some responsibility there. But whether or not he does, that's a debate and a legal case. He could be swift-boated on this. In other words, he could be dogged by families of people who should be supporting him, iron workers. I remember
Catherine Freed, who represented the district in the city council. She was made to appear as if she was a hysterical woman. And she was constantly on the question of the air and being sick from it.
Right.
She lived down there.
If you were critical of the Giuliani administration, then you were crazy.
You were crazy, or you were lefty. You were a commie.
Right, you were a commie or lefty.
We were called commies, but just ordinarily every day on the steps of City Hall. It'd be so ridiculous.
They like to call people Marxists. Not Groucho Marx. But
and he instilled in us he was he paranoid? Is he paranoid?
I think that the position of mayor is conducive to paranoia. Let's face it. It's pretty hard.
I was so spoiled. I worked for John Lindsay. That was many years ago.
You figure you have enemies in everywhere.
So different.
Yeah, I think
it was an open place. It was a place of commerce. It was the city. He came in. He closed it down. He physically closed it down, and as you said, he closed it down with any dialogue or exchange of things.
I think he had a paranoid style. I think he did, especially when things were not going where his way. I think he had staff who were loyal to him and who he genuinely liked and treated well. But
some of them were terrible.
Some of them were terrible. But he kept everything close to the vest.
He also had a lot of corruption, right?
And I think it's the fact that he has not assembled a group of pollsters and advisors at a high level. Now remember, he's polling extremely well in many of the primary states, right? And there are scenarios one could imagine where he could do pretty well in the early presidential primaries in 2008. But he's so close to the vest and maybe paranoid that he's not even bringing people into his orbit, right, that I can see. Now, maybe he's doing it privately and back channels and things, but yeah, and that is a prosecutor.
And he, as a prosecutor, though, one expects that he did everything strictly to law, and we know that there was more patronage and more patronage abuses in that administration than often, right?
Right, and we deal, in America's Mayor, we deal with some of these issues.
American's Mayor, it's a collection of essays and columns, right? Were they newspaper stories?
No, these were all written originally. There's 18 articles reporting some sort of essays, op-ed like essays in it, but it's all original stuff, and we'll revise it. And then a few cases that I thought were terrific. Right.
The artist.
Right.
The poor guy who got stopped by a light in the Bronx, and he said that was.
Right.
You did something like that, and the next day the cops came racing into the house.
Well, there's one guy who has kind of an oral history in the book where he remembers creating an art piece for a protest at Washington Square Park over Giuliani's First Amendment policies, the Brooklyn Museum fiasco, closing it down. And he ended up, the police knocking on his door and arresting him for an ornament on his kitchen wall.
So it's a great book. You've also written another book called Three Men in a Room, and you wrote it with Seymour Lackman, who was a state senator.
Yep.
About what goes on in Albany.
Right.
So it's good to have you around because you tell us what's really going on, and I look forward to more of them.
Thank you, Ronnie.
And thanks, Rob Polner. If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.